So just a little background why this topic is so important for me. I had health issues when I was a child. It ended up being a pituitary adenoma. When I was about 12 and I started going through puberty, I started having health issues and had always been a very healthy child. And long story short, that's what brought me to acupuncture and that's what helped me. And from that time, I've had this real passion to understand those cycles of hormonal cycles. I understand in Western terms, now I understand them as Jing cycles, and how we can fix things at certain stages to prepare for the next stages. It's something that I've used in my personal life and I use extensively in my practice. And a big part of my practice has been understanding how to use these theoretical concepts and applying them to a very different society and how to get people to actually follow these principles. So this is what the talk is today, and it's what the whole series of talks is going to be about. It's going to be applying it mainly to women's bodies because women are complicated, and a lot of the issues that we face are with our female patients. But it's also something that's highly relevant to men. It just hasn't been as a big part of my practice, so I don't feel like I'm a good expert to present these practices for men. And obviously, I'm not a man myself, so I haven't been able to kind of test my theories out in the same way that I can on myself. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes, Nina, thank you. I will look into getting a headset next time. Okay. So the Flourishing Yin series, I started this because I see a lot of women in my practice. I've been practicing for about 10 years now, and I practiced for many of those years in San Diego, recently moved to Southwest Florida. The climate's different. There's a little bit more damp heat, more dryness back there, but other than that, same types of issues coming up. A lot of infertility issues, a lot of young girls already with hormonal imbalances, a lot of women who, even if they get pregnant once, they can't have a second child. A lot of menopausal disasters happening. And what's really sad about those things is a lot of those things are avoidable or can be quickly fixed if they're caught right in the beginning, if people just knew better. For example, with women and fertility, many women, and we are a nourished society compared to what women had, 1,000 years ago. People have good nutrition, they're not dying of starvation. And why all these women can't have a second child, why all these women aren't recovering after their first baby. They age tremendously, their hormones are completely out of whack, they're completely thrown off by having a baby. And, not too long ago, we were able to have several children and women seem to be able to handle it. So what's going on with all of this? Why, do women always go through all of this trauma going through menopause? Why is it so traumatic for women nowadays? And I think it's because we don't know how to take care of ourselves. And that's something that we can learn. We have so much to offer with Chinese medicine on these topics so that women don't have to go through these things. And that's why my purpose in this series is exploring how we can apply these theories, these classical theories from 2,000 years ago, still completely relevant to modern women. You guys doing okay? Mike is okay, I think. No complaints right now? Okay. So the purpose of this class is to kind of go over the nurturing life principles as the foundation of our medicine, and how that kind of really, the nurturing life principles set the course for how our medicine would evolve. And then also understanding the concept of Jing in Chinese medicine. Why is it so important? And what does it really mean in our medicine? And then how to apply that to our own lives and to the lives of our patients. Another reason why this is a really important topic for me is that it reminds me that I have to do these things myself. As a practitioner, I have to take care of my own body before I can take care of other people's bodies. And that's, I think a lot of us need that constant reminder of that. So the structure of a class is going to be going over nurturing life first. and how that kind of evolved in our medicine. What is Jing? There's a few different definitions for what Jing means, and then ideas for the practical application. And I want everyone to feel really free in making comments, asking questions, even if you're disagreeing with me. I think that makes everything lively and more interesting and engaging. I don't want this to be a boring class. Also, if you are interested in this topic, I did an amazing interview with a professor at Pacific College of Oriental Medicine in San Diego in the doctoral program, Dr. Phil Garrison. That's available on my website, leahandrews.com, under episodes. If you're interested in that, it's a more in-depth scholarly look at the concept of Jing Shen and Jing. Just throwing that as an aside. So why is Jing so important? We learn that it's important because it determines how long and how well we live our lives. Jing is kind of like the central concept. It's there right when we're born, and it gives us the trajectory of our lives. And it's also central to this concept of Yangsheng. Yangsheng is what's called nurturing life, and that is this whole set of principles and practices for living a healthy life. And it's about really conserving and extending that Jing. The term nurturing life first appears in the Zhuangzi during the Warring States period. So really early on in Chinese literature and in Taoist literature and in medical literature, you see this concept of nurturing life. And it was interesting because in the Zhuangzi, already there's this kind of separation between the more mystical Taoism, where there's this, or magical Taoism, where the focus is on immortality, kind of at all costs, extending the life of the body as a way of enlightenment, but not necessarily a moral path. And we're nurturing life, according to scholars starting at this time, should have a moral part of it. It's not just about extending the life indefinitely. It's about developing your virtue, and it's about living a healthy life, healthy natural life. It's developed further during the Han Dynasty. So we have the Ma Wangdui manuscripts, which predate, many scholars believe predates the Huangdi Jing by a few centuries there. But it really focuses on, it shows the transition of more magical thinking, moving in towards more our system of medicine that we see now. And then in the Huangdi Jing, you see that real shift over into a more, I guess you could say, practical, scientific approach to medicine. We're not looking at this kind of indefinite immortality. We're looking at more extending our natural years in a very practical way. So the definition of nurturing life is basically to live life in a health promoting way. It means living with the natural cycles, the natural cycles include seasonal cycles, they include daily cycles. You wake up when the yang energy rises and you're going to do more active things at that time. You're going to eat more during that yang time, and then you're going to slowly quiet yourself. And moving into that yin time, you're going to sleep, you're going to rest. Following for women, their monthly cycles, behaving a little bit differently when they have their period, when they're on their moon time versus when they're not. So there's all of these cycles that if we learn how to move with them, we're gaining energy, we are conserving Jing. It's about finding balance in your life. It's about balancing rest with exertion. It's about learning how to quiet the mind. It's about learning how to circulate the qi. So daily life is going to throw us off balance and stagnate things. And if we learn how to circulate our qi through qigong, we can avoid a lot of that stuff. In terms of the bedroom arts, that was also really big, all the way from the Huangdi Jing to the present. That's been a big part of nurturing life practices. It's about learning how to exercise moderation in our procreation, basically. And it's also about the mind, body, and spirit. That's really important. All the way from the Zhuangzi, it's not just about your physical body. If you don't rein in your mind, your thoughts, your emotions, if you do not learn how to focus your spirit, then it's kind of all useless because you're going to dissipate your physical energy anyway. If your emotions are all over the place, or if your mind's all over the place. And also, why are you doing it? If you don't have that higher purpose to align with, why are you working on your body? So that all of that's kind of contained with this idea of nurturing life. Any comments so far? Okay, no one got upset yet about anything I've said. So there's this kind of issue, if you will, going on, which is interesting for me because I went to a Taoist school. I went to Yosan for my master's program, and it was owned by a Taoist family. So we had Qigong every semester, and we learned the classics and all of this stuff. At the same time, I had most of my teachers were Chinese TCM'd doctors, and they were kind of all over the place in terms of how much they practiced Qigong and studied the classics and all of this stuff. And then I went to my doctoral program at Pacific College, which is very integrative medicine focused. So it's interesting to kind of try to pull apart all those little pieces that philosophical Taoism, which is the basis of our medicine, kind of separating that from religious Taoism. That's been something that scholars have been doing for the last several years, is kind of making that division. And I don't know how much, it's a little bit complicated on what is Taoist in our medicine and what isn't, because everything comes from these pre-Taoist principles of yin and yang and the 5 elements, all of those things. And when do we start to separate those things out? Most of us practice Qigong and try to live certain principles that come from the same source as religious Taoism, but most of us practice Taoism as a philosophy, not as a religion. And so there is this little bit of a tension that goes on there with some scholars that I talked to and also some other practitioners about what is really Chinese medicine, what is really Taoism. And that's kind of the idea of nurturing life is a little bit, it kind of creates that separation where in religious Taoism, there's been sometimes this more magical thinking, and with nurturing life, it's very, very practical and can be applied to anyone, anytime. It doesn't matter what their religious beliefs are. The Huangdi Neijing gives 4 categories of physicians. Obviously, they think the scholar physician is the best because that's who they were. The scholar physician were the literate doctors who were catering to the elite, to the royalty, to the rich people, and they were the ones who created more of a systematic, scientific approach to medicine, and they were very concerned with keeping people alive and healthy. A lot of the bedroom arts that we read about were for the elite men, for men who had, a wife and several concubines. Certainly for the emperor, he had to learn how not to dissipate his jing too much because there was a lot of opportunity to do that. May not have been such a big concern for the average man. Issues with eating the right foods and not overindulging, obviously a bigger issue with that audience. The next group were called the skill masters. These physicians were still trained in some of this more scientific form of medicine, but they were also trained in divination, and often in exorcism, and more of these kind of magical thinking types of practices as well. and they cater towards more the middle and lower classes of people. The third category are the shaman physicians, and that has continued to be a strong presence in Chinese culture from ancient times. It was, that's where kind of all of these principles evolved, was from these shamanic practices, the divination practices in the Shang and Zhou dynasties, and they continued on more as a subculture as we get closer, as we get later on in history. But they continue. There's still people nowadays who treat people with talismans, for example. That still exists. It hasn't completely gone away. It just kind of lost favor with the mainstream form of medicine. And then we have the unskilled practitioners, who were kind of the kind of rough, uneducated bloodletters, and but they still had their place in society. But they were the least respected by these scholar physicians. So when we look at our medicine now, we have really modeled ourselves more on the scholar physician, and that's where most of our literature, all of our literature, really comes from. It's from that elite, literate group of physicians. So what this means is that nurturing life is really focused on this concept of tiannian. This is our heaven years, heaven-given years. Our Jing gives us kind of what our normal lifespan should be. And what we get from the Huangdi Neijing, a lot of these early classics, is that we have an ethical obligation almost to live out that time. We were given that time. We should conserve it, take care of that time, and make sure that we live it. That's very different than the pursuit of immortality. So that's really what led really gave the tone to our medicine, is this idea of tiannian. Everyone doing okay? Okay. I'm surprised no one's gotten upset at me yet, but that's good. Disease treatment and prevention has become the focus. So instead of, it gave us more control over our lives as the average person when we moved away from this idea that there's these ghosts and demons that can attack randomly at any time, and then you had to rely on people who are versed in magic themselves that can kind of fight them in the spirit realm. Again, that still exists, the exorcism, the talismans, you can find that even to this day. But the focus of the mainstream medicine shifted in the Han Dynasty to this focus on diet, lifestyle, and treatment. So it means that we as individuals have a lot of control over the direction of our lives. If we live in a healthy way, if we build up our bodies, then we can eliminate a lot of these external pathogens, and even issues with ghosts and things like that. If we are stronger within ourselves, it makes it much less likely that these things will influence us. So it can be viewed as a very empowering form of medicine. It may not have been as widely available to the masses, but as modern people, this is a very empowering way to look at health, to see how much we have power to influence the course of our lives. If we take care of ourselves at a certain stage, we're preparing for the next stage. And I see this kind of, in my modern patients, this kind of feeling of you can't help, the aging process is this horrible process, and it's inevitable, and there's nothing you can do. I hear this all the time, especially here in Southwest Florida, where I have an older population. There definitely is that part of our culture as we get older. It's like, oh, this is the way it is. No, this is the way it is when you don't take care of yourself. And so bringing that empowerment back to our patients and back into our own lives is so important. Sun Simiao, we're jumping forward about 1,000 years here. He was the next scholar physician to really expand this idea of nurturing life in a fundamental way, because he focused a lot on women. I wouldn't call him an early feminist by any stretch of the imagination, but what he did do was, when he wrote his prescriptions, he put women first, because the health of women, the woman was central to the health of the whole family. And he understood that. He understood that having a healthy woman meant healthy babies, and increased health for the next generations, which is it's revolutionary actually when you look at the medieval world around the world. This idea that you had to keep women strong so they could have healthy babies and the healthy genetic material for the next generations. He also infused a lot of ethics into the nurturing life practices, which was really important. He had a big foundation in Buddhism, so he brought a lot of those Buddhist concepts into the ethics of Chinese medicine. Nutrition was also really important in his writings, as well as the bedroom arts, and that's where we'll talk more about his bedroom arts writing when we talk about Taoist sexuality. Not so much of a feminist in that realm, but certainly in terms of increasing the health of women. He said that women were 10 times more complicated, more difficult to treat than men were, because women are that much more complicated. So I thought that was interesting. There is a lot of current popularity with these nurturing life practices in China, and it's really amazing how the lay public really has embraced these practices. Like I was in Hangzhou last year, and you see everybody's there around the lake doing their different qigong practices. People are walking around with their green tea and their thermoses, and there's a real awareness in the culture for trying to live a healthy life. And just like there is in ours, it's become extremely popular in our culture, trying to be healthier. But I think in our culture, there isn't that traditional background to kind of guide us. And so you see all these bad diets and extreme behaviors and not an understanding of rest and balance. That's still something that we in the West are really struggling with, especially in American society. So what is Jing? Oh, any questions so far? I don't see anything. Okay. So this is taken from, and I'm gonna massacre her name. Let's see, Elizabeth de Rachel de Valle. Anyway, I'm sorry, but she is a wonderful translator and writer in Chinese medicine, and she presented at the recent symposium the definition of Jing. So I'm taking her definitions. These are quotes from her on the 5 definitions of what Jing is. So the first definition is that Jing is development. She says, vitality, it's what allows any form of life to appear, develop, transform, evolve. The basis of development and of the maintenance of life as body, as well as mind and spirit. So what's interesting, she starts off as saying that it's any form of life. So it reminds us that all of these concepts of qi, jing, shen, these are not just contained within our own bodies. These are universal concepts that affect all of life. So we see this kind of development in animals, in plants, in all living things. So that's a very important thing. The other thing too is that it includes our mind and our spirit as well as the body. It's not just our physical body that's going through these transformations. So this is really talking about pre-heaven Jing, which is one part of Jing. It's stored in the kidneys. It's given at birth. So both the mother and the father are going to be giving their Jing to the child. And when the 2 Jing come together, conception occurs. This Jing is guided by the Po, the corporeal soul, the spirit of the lung, to organize the Jing into the physical body. And that's what gives us our separation. The Jing really gives us our separate identity, whereas the Hun kind of connects us to the whole. So the Po is very connected with circulating the Jing through our body. And that really shows how the Jing also is very connected with our physicality and our vitality in a physical way. And it's considered difficult, if not impossible, depending on who you talk to supplement this pre-heaven Jing. So we're left with really having to conserve with what we've been given. That's really the focus with pre-heaven Jing. And if you go look at the Huangdi Jing, we have a roadmap for what we can look forward to, at least if we don't really take care of ourselves. The Jing cycles were given in the context of we no longer live according to natural cycles. So that means that we are going to lose our fertility and our vitality a lot sooner, and we're going to die sooner. And so I don't want, people shouldn't get too depressed about the Jing cycles when we understand that this is what happens when we're not living a good life, when we're not nurturing ourselves. So at 7 years old, the kidney energy is going to become abundant, and the teeth are formed at age 14. After that maturation of the kidneys, that excess Jing that's coming up is what's going to fill the Chong and the Ren channels, and that's what's going to lead to menstruation, and girls will become fertile. And everything is going well until about age 35, when things start to contract and weaken. And it's interesting to note that it's the Yang Ming channels in women that start to weaken first and start to cause that decrease in vitality. And what's really important here is, when we're looking at these cycles, is that we want to make sure that, for example, if you catch a girl at 7 and she's pre-developing, she's already looks like she's at age 14 in terms of starting her menstruation, we already know there's a problem there, and starting to treat it at that time and not waiting until she's in her late 20s and wants to get pregnant or whatever. Same thing at age 35, that's when we start to treat menopause. And I know, good luck trying to get women to talk about that at age 35, but that's when we need to, as women, start to supplement ourselves, start taking better care of our Jing, be more focused on nurturing life practices, because then we are going to have a much smoother menopause. It's going to happen later. It's not going to be as traumatic and have all these things. And it's something it can be very challenging to try to convey to people. In our culture, we're all about what's happening now, and we need to shift our timeline to more of this kind of classical medical timeline, where we're looking at the whole life, and we're also looking at generations. That's how we build Jing, build the health of our society. By building the health of each person, by conserving it over a course of a lifetime, and building it for the next generations. I think right now we're doing the opposite with the way that we're living, unfortunately. And also at age 49, I see a lot of beautiful, healthy women in my practice. You don't have to be all withered at age 49. So this is kind of like the scare tactic of what can happen if you're not taking care of yourself. And we have another scare tactic for men too. Same type of thing. At age 8, that kidney energy is maturing, and by age 16, that kidney Jing is kind of overflowing, and men can actually produce children. And at age 40, it starts to decline a little bit. With men, it's much more focused on the kidney and liver organ systems. We don't have that focus on the Yang Ming as we do with women. And by age 64, it's gotten very bleak. Again, it doesn't have to be this way. It means that by age 40, men have to really focus on conserving their Jing, so that they can have a healthy Jing levels for later on in life, and they don't have to suffer all of these horrible things. I have both seen in my practice and in speaking with colleagues, there's a lot of younger men with erectile dysfunction and hormonal issues, and in their 30s, much earlier than it should be happening. And so this idea of Jing conservation is really important also for men as well. So hopefully there will be other practitioners talking more about Jing conservation in men and do their own series on that as well. I have a question or comment from Jennifer. Other than telling women that are having babies later how to eat well when they're pregnant and nursing, what can we do for them if they're afraid to take herbs because the baby is either developing or nursing? There's a lot of things, and we're going to go over that in the section on postpartum care. I don't focus as much on pregnancy, but what I do also is I include a lot of food herbs. I get people to cook with them, and so it doesn't feel like they're taking herbs. So it's a way to kind of sneak it in. That's one way I address that. And I focus a lot on diet and on lifestyle. Rest is really important, especially if they're not going to be taking herbs. They have to rest. And if you kind of present in that way, like, okay, if you're not going to be taking these herbal formulas, you're going to have to really focus on the lifestyle stuff, then kind of scare them a little bit of what can happen, because a lot of horrible things do happen when women don't take care of themselves. They can get incontinence and horrible side effects when they don't practice, just basic self-care during the postpartum time. Any other comments? Okay. So practical application of this idea, this first definition of Jing, is that we need to focus on proper development right from the beginning and catch things early on. Teach healthy living very early. We don't wait until people can't misbehave anymore. That's, I think, another thing I see a lot in our culture is like, oh, I'm in my late 30s now, or whatever, age 40, 50. I can't do what I used to. Well, what you used to do was trashing your body, and you had enough Jing to compensate. That's not the best way to go about life, to kind of push yourself really, really hard until you can't go anymore, and then, oh, let me start taking care of myself. If we take care of ourselves reasonably well, obviously practicing moderation, and from early on, we don't have to ever hit that wall. We're just going to have a lot more energy to kind of carry us through the inevitable difficult times. So I think there needs to be a real adjustment in the way that we conceive of youth and having lots of Jing, rather than spending it all. Trying to conserve it right from the beginning. It's going to leave a lot left for when we're at the end of our lives, just like our retirement. The more you conserve, earlier conserve, the easier it is to have a bunch left over at the end. And certainly at age 35 for women, age 40 for men, really focusing on Jing conservation and starting to take tonics, stop misbehaving in your lifestyle. And most people know when they're misbehaving. But that becomes increasingly important, and that's the way we live a better life. The second definition, Elizabeth Rochat de Valle, I don't want to say that's her name. The second definition she gives is the definition of post-heaven Jing. And that is the vitality contained in all what enters the body and is assimilated, incorporated, especially the food or the five tastes, the Wu Wei. It pervades the five Zhang organs to allow their functioning at each level: physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. So here we're talking about not what we were given at birth, but what we're taking in every single day of our lives. That is also a big part of our Jing. So focus of that, one of the main parts of what we take in is our nutrition. Huangdi Jing and our medicine puts a huge emphasis on nutrition as the first medicine. So eating with the seasons and with the climate. For example, here in Southwest Florida, great big part of the year, it's just damp heat climate. So, having a lot of fatty foods or sugary foods catches up to you a lot faster than it did back in San Diego. I definitely have learned that lesson. Alcohol, all these things, what you get away with in San Diego, can cause pretty quick pathogenic issues in Southwest Florida. So it's important to know where you are, what the climate's doing, and adjusting your diet accordingly to that. Also with the seasons, having ice cream in winter, very different effect on the body, or I should say salad, something more healthier, than having it in the spring or summer. So just kind of adjusting ourselves, our diet to balance ourselves compared to what's happening with the outside world is really, really important. Also, using the diet to support and fix the constitution over time or any health conditions that are going on. That's another huge part of our medicine. And the use of medicated diet or Yaoshan. I use that a lot with, as you'll see in the next classes, with balancing menstruation, menopausal issues, postpartum issues, rejuvenation, all of those things. That is basically using the better tasting food herbs that are appropriate and cooking with them. And there are ways, I'm finding, to make it taste palatable and actually even good if you're creative with it. So I know that sometimes medicated diet has a bad connotation in people's minds, like you're going to be eating this horrible tasting food that will make you better, but it actually can be quite pleasant if you learn how to cook with them properly. Difference between Jing and Essence. Let me see here, I didn't catch it. So the difference between Jing and Essence. Essence is usually the English translation for Jing. That's my understanding of it. It's not, it doesn't completely embody the term, but it's this idea that Jing is our most precious, vital energy, like essence. It's the essence of a person. It's that most guarded central part of them. But it's also it's a more physical part, more physical in quality than qi, which is just kind of it's completely insubstantial. Jing is substantial, and so that's why I think we think of it as being the essence. Does that answer the question? Or I don't know if that's a very good answer, but I think that's just the English translation of Jing. The 5 flavors, as all of us know, we should be eating them every day to balance ourselves, and we're obviously going to focus on certain ones when we have imbalances to balance ourselves out. And we have this idea of moderation from the Guangzi. For all, the way of eating, or the Tao of eating, is this: overfilling yourself with food will impair your vital energy and cause your body to deteriorate. Over-restricting your consumption causes the bones to wither and the blood to congeal. The mean between overfilling and over-restricting, this is called harmonious completion. It is where vital essence, Jing, lodges, and knowledge, Zhi, is generated. So our post-heaven Jing is cultivated, is amassed by us eating in moderation. So this is really important because sometimes, I know we're all aware that people overeat in our culture. Our culture is, we have an overabundance of food, not very good food, not very satisfying food. We have emotional issues, and so we overeat. So we have a cultural concept that overeating is bad. But we also kind of, we don't really understand undereating sometimes, and I know this is going to vary depending on the people that you cater to in your practice. But I know with upper middle class women, there is this real push to being too skinny, and health is kind of overdoing things, including over-restricting the diet, having these kind of really extreme bad diets where you are restricting certain kinds of foods so that it starts becoming detrimental to the health. So it's really important to kind of step back and remember that food is meant to be enjoyed. There's a concept in Chinese medicine that if you do not enjoy your food, it's actually bad for your spleen. That's really important. We're meant to love food and enjoy the process of eating. That sometimes gets lost when we're talking about health. And when we eat in moderation, it's about harmony. We feel better when we eat just the right amount, when we're not eating too much or too little, when we're enjoying things. So it's really important to have that piece when we're talking about healthy eating as part of nurturing life. Someone is agreeing with me about over-restricting. You might have had the same patients there. Some Jing nourishing foods, not necessarily what everyone's eating, but maybe certain cultures, like in French culture. Bone marrow is a direct Jing tonic. Pictured there. Bone broth is very popular in our culture right now. You can make it taste really good. I'm going to have a recipe on that during the next class for Dongui chicken, for example. But it basically, you can make it taste as good as you want to, because besides adding the bones, you can add any kind of seasoning or vegetables or any other things that you want to add to there to make it really, really a tasty thing. And then you can use bone broth as your base for your soups. So it has a lot of ways to incorporate bone broth into your diet if you're not vegetarian. Sea cucumber. I've actually never had the courage to try it because it looks a little scary to me, but it is another Jing tonifying food. Royal jelly, also wonderful Jing tonic. Not so nice for the bees necessarily, but very good Jing tonic. Also eating kidney of pretty much any animal brain, placenta. We don't generally advocate eating placenta unless it's yours after you give birth, but it is a Jing tonic for sure. Yes, that's my next slide. So vegetarian options, because that is a big part of the population that we treat, at least for myself. Black beans, black rice, black sesame seeds, actually rice and beans in general are good Jing tonics. Walnuts, goji berries, mulberries, cereal grasses. A lot of times with vegetarian patients, especially when they're going through certain times like during their menstruation or menopause, or times when they need more, their protein needs are greater, they tend to become more blood deficient, or tax their kidneys more. I focus on adding herbs to their diet or putting them on herbs to supplement them. I personally have had a hard time being vegetarian myself because of my constitution, but I do understand absolutely the ethical motivations to become a vegetarian, and I think some people do better on a vegetarian diet. So always keeping that open mind and modifying things for what your patients need and how they want to live their lives is important. It absolutely is possible to be healthy as a vegetarian. You just have to kind of be more aware and modify things a little bit. Cereal grasses, wheatgrass, barley grass. I know it's has a very cooling function, but it has a lot of nutrients for the body. This is a recipe right here, and I'm sorry that the slide is a little messed up there. But oxtail soup, I know that's everybody's favorite. So what you can do is saute some onions in oil in a pot until it's browned. That always makes things taste better. And then you can just add water, some oxtail, some vegetables in there to your liking, ginger, any spices that taste good to you. Spices are going to help kind of activate that yang aspect of the kidneys. And then add some hashawu, gochujang, and dujang. Those are not horrible tasting herbs, so they're easily hidden in a nice flavorful pot of soup. You're going to simmer that for 3 to 4 hours. You can put in a crock pot, for example. Add some parsley and serve. It's a great winter Jing tonifying soup. And then for our vegan vegetarians, you have 8 treasure rice congee. You're going to, with any kind of congee, you want to do 1 part grain to about 5 or 6 parts liquid. And so in this one, I'm adding glutinous black rice and jasmine rice. I like that pairing, having either like a white sticky rice or black sticky rice with regular jasmine rice, half and half. I think that makes I like that consistency. You can also just use the sticky rice if you prefer that. And then red aduki beans, very good for removing water weight, good for the heart. It's a good diuretic. And then adding lianzi lotus nut, which has, I found that it's really helpful. I actually use lianzi a lot when there's any kind of not just spleen deficiency, but blood deficiency as well. When I'm adding more lubricating kind of herbs, having that astringent function, and Lienza is very well tolerated. Gochitsa, Longyanro, good tasting food herbs, and Chenpi, and also chestnuts. Chestnuts are really tasty, and they're great for your kidneys. So it's a good thing to add to that, and it thickens the soup, so it has a thickening function as well. Oh, so people are talking about where to get. You can get Costco. You can get oxtail apparently. Do I have a cookbook? No, but I have recipes in all my books. And I love to talk about food because I really enjoy food, as you can tell. The other aspect of post-Heaven Jing is the breath. So, seems self-explanatory, but most of us have to relearn natural breathing. This is why, and for me, I'm speaking for myself personally, when I go to yoga class or start doing my Qigong, it's like, oh, I feel so good. It's because I haven't been breathing normally. When I force myself to breathe well, it takes me out of being stressed out immediately. And it makes me realize how much in my daily life I forget how to breathe naturally and breathe well. But that's half of how we take in our post-Heaven Jing, and it's important to emphasize that we cannot control certain factors like the pollution directly as an individual, but we can control our breath, and that means really opening up our chest on in the front and the sides and the back, expanding the abdomen on the inhale, and really having that movement in the body and really breathing naturally and fully. Really, really important. So Qigong, as I alluded to before, why is it so important as part of our nurturing life practices in Chinese medicine? One reason is because it helps us to breathe the way we're supposed to breathe. It helps us to start using our breath, controlling our breath as a means to control our emotions, kind of rein in our emotions, to stop our crazy monkey minds from going all over the place. Also as a means of learning how to direct the energy in our body. All of that's done through the breath. And so one thing that I do a lot is I give breathing exercises during my treatments with patients. So it's hard sometimes to get people to do homework unless they are in enough pain to be motivated. But when they're already on that table, I give them a breathing exercise. It helps them relax in the moment. It helps them get into their body, make that transition from the outside world to the treatment room faster. And it also, I think, carries over like, oh, I felt good when I breathed like that. Maybe I'll do that tonight to help myself sleep or whatever. It's a good way to kind of introduce that to people. And also, if you can get them to do Qigong exercises, it's something that we should all be doing. I know in our culture, yoga is more available, and that's another great option. It's not exactly the same, but it has that same function of getting us to regulate our breathing, becoming, first of all, aware of our breathing, and knowing that we can use it to start changing how we feel. And it really doesn't matter how we do that. It just matters that we have that awareness. Okay. Air quality. We do not have, as individuals, like I said, so much control over that. We do as a group. We definitely need to work on, making our air cleaner. It's something that's happened, in LA, it used to be horrific, and it's gotten better. Still not as good as it should be, but it does show that we can make a difference when we kind of push for environmental change. So that is something that's important for us as a whole, as a people. But on an individual level, there are still things that you can do for air quality. One thing is to have indoor plants, and certain indoor plants like peace lily, Schefflera. There's several certain types of ficus. There's several plants that are actually good to help clean the impurities out of our air and our indoor air. You should plant trees around your property. All of those things start to help change the air quality around us. And also having air purifiers. I can't recommend one in particular, but these are things that we can start doing to clean up our airspace. So when we learn those great breathing exercises, we're actually breathing in good air. And that's why we feel so good when we go to the mountains or a place that's clean. It feels so good just to breathe. You know, I feel like you feel like you're recharging yourself. Oh, you want me to pull back the kanji slide? I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Okay, yes, you will have a copy of this. Um, and you can modify this however you like. Whatever herbs that you happen to have lying around. I have them in my kitchen, of course. Uh, you can just play with them and add them. Add the ones that you like. There's no strict rules about this. Kanji is a great way to incorporate some really good nutrition into your morning. So, okay. Oh, grams of herbs. For the kanji, honestly, with this, I usually take like maybe 5 of the lotus nuts, and I'll take like a small handful of goji berries and longyanro, um, longan berries. Chestnuts, I might do 5 or 6 chestnuts, and chenpi, I'll do maybe like a tablespoon. Um, what should we add to the chicken kanji? Oh, I didn't go over chicken kanji in this one. I have the oxtail soup and I have the rice, just plain rice kanji. If I was going to make a chicken kanji the way I do it, actually they do this in Brazilian cooking. I got this from my mom. You are going to saute some onions. I like to use dark meat chicken versus white meat chicken, just personal preference. You're going to saute that with the onions, let it get brown. And then you can add ideally some bone broth or some vegetable stock, or just plain water is fine too. And then you're going to add your rice. Again, you're going to do the proportion about 1 part rice to about 5 parts water, so you don't want to have it, as much rice in there. I like to use just white jasmine rice for my chicken kanji. I also like to use some tomatoes. You want to peel the tomatoes and remove the seeds to keep it from getting bitter. I also like to add peas. That's something my mom would do. I don't know, you get used to those things from your childhood. I like to chop up some ginger really fine. I actually use a grater to add that, and maybe some minced garlic as well. I let that cook for, I don't know, about 30-40 minutes, simmer it, and then I add a little bit of parsley, and that's the way I like to eat it. You can add, with dangui chicken, I do a little bit differently, and I'll go over that next time we talk. I do want to kind of go ahead and move on here before I get too distracted on these things. Get me talking about food. So yeah, air quality, really, really important, and we do have some choice over that. Definition number 3, Jing Qi. The living substances of the body, especially all that nourishes, nutrient, essence Jing paired with Qi, forms a yin-yang couple expressing all the aspects of working life in the cosmos. So this idea of Jing Qi. First of all, you have this concept that Jing by itself is kind of this inert, heavy, concentrated substance. It's very yin. So you need these other aspects to move it through the body. So you see it often paired with Jing, paired with Qi, or paired with Shen, with this idea that there are these other active agents moving, circulating the Qi through the body. The Jing is, as we said before, the Jing is circulated through the body and used to create the body through the Po, through the corporeal soul. The Qi also is paired with Jing in a lot of writings to illustrate Jing being moved through the body or being used for something. So it also relates to how the Jing is through the interaction of the 3 treasures. If the essence is strong, Qi flourishes. If Qi flourishes, the mind is whole. So Jing does not exist on its own. Jing is not this like isolated substance. It is the foundation for the qi, which is the foundation for the shen. And the opposite is also true. If the shen is disturbed, if we're going through a lot of emotional stuff, it's going to disrupt our qi. It's going to weaken our jing. So the jing is in this axis of substances. Another way that the jing can get depleted through the three treasures is through emotional stress generating fire long term, which is going to injure the yin and the jing specifically. So the jing is the biological foundation of the mind. It's the foundation for our a lot of our other thinking and less physical processes. Life comes about through the essence, through the jing. When the two essences, the two jings of the mother and the father unite, they form the mind. So here we really see that if you look in Western terms, the brain itself is considered a jing substance. The spinal cord is a jing substance, but that supports all of the energetic occurrences, all of those neuroconnections that are happening on a less physical level, supported by the physical structure of the brain. So the jing, with this very physical substance, is supporting all of these other more etheric functionings. We're still talking about food. I love it. So again, the jing and the pull gives movement to jing throughout our lives, not just during our gestation. The pull controls the exiting and entering of the jing. So it gives, this is from the Ling Shu, it involves jing in physiological processes throughout the body. So the jing is very tied to our hormonal functionings, for example, in that the pull kind of moves the jing through an internal axis throughout the body, whereas the hun moves energy in and out of the body more external. The pull has a more internal focus. Then we get to this concept of Jing Shen, which I think is very important for our culture at this time. This is a quote from the Huainan Zi, which is contemporary to the Huangdi Neijing. So it's not in the same classical text, but written around the same time, part of that same movement at the beginning of our medicine. The apertures of perception, the eyes and the ears, are the portals of the quintessential spirit. Quintessential spirit is Jing Shen. When the blood and vital energy are agitated and not at rest, then the Jing Shen, the quintessential spirit, courses out through the eyes and the ears and is not preserved. So here we see that, going back to some other writings, that it's pointless to develop the physical body, to feed your body good foods, to sleep well, when you're not refining your mind. Because the Jing is going to be dissipated by a mind that's out of control, by emotions that are out of control, by a spirit that's out of control. It's dissipated by distractions. So you think about our culture, which is all about distractions. We have shorter attention spans. It's like, look at this is better. Look over here and buy this and do this. And what are you doing now? And you have to be taking action. And wanting this obsession with novelty, all of this distraction, it's taxing our Jing. And so learning how to that's why meditation is so important, why these Qigong and yoga practices are so important, is to take that moment, even if we do it for a little bit every day, of disconnecting from all of these external distractions and pulling ourselves inward and kind of seeing how we feel, focusing on our breath, and not always having our energy going out in all these different directions, but pulling our energy back into ourselves. The more we can do that, the more we're conserving our Jing. And I think that's an important part that we don't always address. We don't address it because it's not, it's the most inconvenient concept related to Jing, is that we need to stop being so distracted. We need to be more focused, more present in our lives in a way to, as a means to conserve our Jing. And definitely with our electronics, I know for myself, when I'm working on a project on my computer, I swear I can feel my vitality come out of my eyes into the computer. And I get, I get tired and depleted from it. And so we do need to take a step back and live a more calm, natural life as much as we can in our crazy, hectic, modern world. Any comments on that? The food is definitely got more comments. Practical application of this. Most of our patients, most of us are stressed out. So we need to take action steps to start to calm down our emotions. And the good news is that when even very simple practices, very simple breathing practices, going for a walk in a beautiful place, it's like, just like that, it can take all that stuff away. It can bring you back to yourself. It can bring you back into awareness, into the present moment. So as easy as it is to slip and get all crazy, it's equally easy to come back. It doesn't take that much to do that. We just have to be aware and make the effort to do it. So I think that modern people have an even greater need for Qigong and these meditation practices to conserve Jing. If they were talking about this 2,000 years ago, when we didn't have all of this stuff going on as we do now, they thought it was an issue back then. Imagine what they would think if they saw us now. How important this is. We should all have some kind of a physical relaxation practice, whatever that means to us. And I should make a note, sometimes it's not sitting down in meditation. Not everybody is there or was wired for that. I know that some people, running is a wonderful meditation. Kundalini yoga is great because it starts off being very physically exhausting. So if we're really agitated and it's difficult for us to calm down, sometimes doing these very physical exercises, including the breath with a very physical exercise, is a great way to let off some of that excess agitated energy and help to focus the mind. So we do need to develop accommodations for a more modern, more hectic world and find out how to work with that. Definition number 4, essential yin. That which is treasured by the kidneys, the yin of the kidneys. So again, the Jing is associated more with the yin aspect of the kidneys, whereas the yang is associated more with the Mingmen fire, more that movement. This means that Jing is associated with stillness, with depth, with turning inward, with that which is hidden. So a big challenge in our culture is that we are all about yang activities and really honoring and showing importance to the yin activities of slowing down, of calming down. We focus so much on accomplishing. We can't accomplish if we don't have the energy to sustain it. And that's something that I know I struggle with, and I think most of my patients struggle with, and probably a lot of you as well. I do want to stream a video right now on, actually have 2 of them. The first one, this is on how to calm the mind. This actually comes from it's actually a yogic practice. It's called the Yoni Mudra. Yoni means womb in Sanskrit. And I know it's not traditional Taoist, but what I really like about this practice is that it teaches us how to very quickly get out of our senses and out of our mind chatter and going inward and quieting down. So this is just a little tool that I learned through the years to calm my mind down when I couldn't settle down. I'll just press here. Let's see if this works.
This is the Yoni Mudra. Yoni is a Sanskrit word for womb, and this helps to bring you into a fetus-like state where you're closed off from all of your senses and you're completely internalized. It is an excellent meditation to do when you're stressed out or having trouble focusing. So you're going to spread out your fingers, and you're going to take each finger to close off one of your senses. So your thumbs are going to cover your ears. Your index finger is going to rest lightly over your eyelids. Your middle finger is going to rest on your nostrils. Your ring fingers over your lips, your pinkies under your lips. You're going to inhale deeply, and then you're going to close off your nostrils for a second. You're going to release your nostrils, and you're going to hum, and it's going to sound like bees are buzzing in your head. So now I'm going to demonstrate. You're going to take a deep breath in. And again. And I'm just going to release. You can repeat this for a few cycles, and you'll find that very quickly it internalizes you, brings you into a very calm state, and helps you to focus.
Okay. So that was just a quick little way to kind of calm the mind down when you find it escaping from you. Very important to come back to that stillness. There was a comment on the stream about having excess screen use having to do with blood deficiency. Absolutely. It will, not only do I see it as a form of Jing loss, but it agitates and imbalances the liver blood for sure. And you think about children being brought up already glued to their little screens from a very early age, and what that's doing to them. There's whole professions of people that are just glued to their screens and don't interact with human beings. And I notice that when I'm on the computer, on technology for too long, there's an adjustment when you come back to the real world. It's almost like things are operating at a different speed, and it takes a minute to readjust like that. And that's kind of scary, I think. It shows how detached we're becoming. Let me see here. This is not on YouTube. This is just a video that I made. Can children with sensory integration issues use this to calm themselves? Absolutely. Kids love the more playful and short you can make things. I think that you kind of look goofy when you do that one, the Yoni Mudra, and I think that's a really good attractant to children. Doing something that's kind of off the wall and goofy. The other thing too is kind of playing with this idea of doing the 5 animal frolics where you're imitating animals moving. That's another great one to get kids started doing Qigong practices. Things that are a little bit more active or more entertaining are a great way to bring kids into doing self-cultivation practices. You can't make it boring, and you can't take too long with it. But kids are very open. I was really scared of treating teenagers and treating children when I first started practicing, but they are the most rewarding people to treat because they're so open. If you tell them about, if you just explain to them, you can explain to them in exactly those terms. Like when you're staring at a screen, it's going to sap your vitality through your eyes. Oh my God, they love those kinds of things. And I think they get it because they're still operating with imagination. And so they can absorb that kind of metaphoric language much better than a somber adult can. So I think kids very much respond to this. They just need to be taught this stuff. And it'll start making a change for them. Absolutely. Let me see here. So we have Gary Busey. Why you should not overuse drugs and alcohol. Jing, as a yin substance, is consumed by excesses of yang. So excess of drug abuse, those kinds of things that where you're really overexcitement. So these adrenaline junkies are going to be sapping their yin jing. People who, are people who live very stressful lives and don't have a choice over it. People who are, fighting wars or live in very high crime areas where they're afraid all the time. They're going to be sapping that Jing energy through that. Also, lack of rest and an overactive mind, so less dramatic. Excesses of yang, like overworking, which is what most of us are doing in our society. We're just overthinking and overworking, which isn't as dramatic as being a soldier in Iraq, but it in its own way is that constantly depleting our Jing if we are not balancing that with rest and self-nurturing. So one thing that we can do is we can do some water activities. This comes from my mentor and friend, Patricia McCarthy. She was my instructor on Mian Sheng Chinese space reading, and she does a lot with how to incorporate the 5 elements in our lives. So if we want to create more water element in our constitution, we can do more water element activities. So one thing we can do is turn off our electronics and just watch the sunset. Daydreaming is a very water element activity. Einstein used to wander around and have all of these, just contemplating things. That's a very water activity. And I think a lot of us don't allow ourselves that time and space for that. To kind of be timelessness. We're constantly on a schedule. And we're supposed to be doing something. And just allowing for that, just freedom from time constraints. Take a trip and wander without an itinerary. Just kind of see what happens. Lay down in the grass and watch the clouds go by. Take a ballet dancing or a tango class. Those are very sensual movement kinds of classes, sensual music. And that takes us into our bodies, into our water element, and away from that kind of goal-driven, sapping kind of activities that most of us are raised into. And for that, we have to schedule lazy time. Usually most of us don't have just free time hanging around, especially as we get older. We have careers, we have family, we have all these obligations. And taking that time to schedule in lazy time, it's not lazy time, it's our water time. It's our Jing rejuvenation time. That's something that's really important for all of us as practitioners and for our patients as well. Oh, her name is Patricia McCarthy, and she has the Mian Xiang Institute. It's written in Wade Giles Pinyin, so that's M-I-A-N, I believe, or no, M-I-E-N-S-H-I-A-N-G, Mian Xiang. Also, feng shui to add water. This is my current favorite orchid. It's a Dendrobium, I think Pierardi, I think is, but it's a very water element orchid. There's this kind of wild abandon. This is the tropics version of wisteria, which is another very water kind of plant. So planting these kinds of very dramatic, kind of disheveled plants in your space. Peonies, if you can't grow peonies, which I can't, they are, just get them as cut flowers. They have them at Trader Joe's every once in a while. Peonies are a great water plant. Camellias, iris, lotus flowers, having gentle water features, nothing like rough, or pictures of gentle, still waters. Those are going to increase that yin water in our environment, especially if you are a more overactive person, or if you have those patients that are kind of excess wood. They tend to deplete that Jing very quickly. Just adding some more of that still water element to their environment, it's subconsciously starts to change us and starts to calm us down. Flowing fabrics, having wandering pathways, so things that kind of invite you to wander, or having like a picture of a pathway. Those things encourage that part of our mind that is just kind of contemplating and like daydreaming, and it activates a different part of ourselves. And also having hidden areas of the house. Those are some ways that we can start to shift our minds to being more watery, more Jing conscious people. So definition number 5, the sperm. The sperm is sometimes translated as Jing itself in some of the Chinese medical literature. Is that it here? Okay. Oh, yes. In terms of nooks and crannies, asking me about the hidden areas of the house. Hidden, you don't want clutter. You don't want hidden areas that can form clutter or kind of sinister, or like a yucky garage or something. That's not going to increase your water element. It's more of like you go around a corner and there's this little fairy garden, or you have just kind of like a little nook for you to go in your house where you can kind of sit and read, or something like that. Like creating like a little mini space that's not out in the open. It's a little bit more hidden. That is a very water element kind of feature to have in your home. I know, for example, Patricia McCarthy's, again, to quote my mentor, she recommends that the entrance to your house not be a direct line. It should kind of meander a little bit. And if it doesn't do that with the walkway, you try to do it with plants or with water features to kind of create this more gentle flow into a space. So going back to Jing, that which allows the reproductive life, the sperm. So the sperm itself is Jing. It's what gives Jing to all of us that are born. So what does that mean? Well, that means that men have to be very careful with their sperm. It means that men are injured by excessive ejaculation, because that's literally Jing leaving their body. Sun Simiao advocates moderating ejaculation frequency starting at age 40, which, if you go back to the Jing cycles in the Huangbing Jing, is when men start to naturally decline in their Jing functioning. And so they cannot or should not be as free with their sperm loss as when they were younger. And this is the basis of some really controversial aspects of the bedroom arts and of Chinese medicine, because it's been used as a basis from everything from celibacy to reverse ejaculation to sexual vampirism to all kinds of things. And this is something we're going to debate more in depth during the Taoist sexuality class. But basically, I think what needs to happen, this is a big area for men, even though men they're less complicated. There's a bigger hurdle with modern men and this idea of sexual moderation, completely separated from any kind of sexual shaming or any of these other things, but looking at sexual moderation as a health practice. I think it's challenging because in our society now we're kind of getting away from all this puritanical constraints and shaming of being sexual, and then we've gone the opposite way, where it's like, all of these sexual excesses and kind of having sex just be like overdone and used to promote everything, and neither one of those things is healthy. Again, there's this moderation I think that we can arrive at where we are conscious of the fact that Jing is sperm. Jing is lost through the sperm, but that also, just like with other aspects of moderation, it doesn't mean that we go to these extremes. We don't go through extremes with food or with sleeping or with anything else. It's just another natural process that we have to learn how to find the balance with, and find the balance for ourselves. What's a healthy amount of food for one person won't be for the next, and finding that balance within yourself. So I think that's something that we really need to address in our modern culture, and something that I still, the reason why I haven't written about or talked about men and Jing as extensively is because I have felt constrained a little bit as a female practitioner. I have men, every once in a while come to me with erectile dysfunction. It's not something I always feel comfortable discussing with men, because when I say things like, limiting masturbation and limiting pornography and all these things, because those are ways in which you're, losing energy without having an exchange of energy. It's not always received well. And I think coming from another man, it might be better received. But that's definitely information that I think needs to get out there. It needs to be more available, and understanding how some of our modern practices are depleting our Jingshen, are depleting our vitality. And that's why you see a lot more men, at least from what I've heard kind of anecdotally, men younger having these kind of sexual dysfunction issues when they really shouldn't start to appear until much later on in life. It also means we're probably depleting our Jing in other ways, like these, small children, tied to their electronics and all these other little ways. We're eating food that isn't as nourishing and all these things. We're breathing air that's, has more toxins in it than people a few generations ago. So all of those things are playing into that, of course. So when we relate Jing with sexuality, that means that implies a few things. It implies that we're going to be losing Jing by having sex too early, before being fully developed. That is something that is explicitly explained in several of the classical medical texts. Is that children should not, there should be a certain level of maturity reached before we as people start engaging sexually. And I think that's really profound. You can think about throughout history, girls were married off, prepubescent girls were married off as wives. And to have this concept very early on that a girl should be at a certain age of sexual maturity before she can, have a child and be healthy with it, and then also before she should engage in sex at all, or else it will injure her. And sex while intoxicated, there's a lot written about this from the Huangdi Neijing. Apparently it was a problem back then as well. This idea of not being intoxicated while engaging in sexuality, that's it, or on drugs, I would, imply in a modern sense as well, because that's going to be really taxing the Jing on a more profound level. And if you think about our culture, that's the way that a lot of us are, if you think about college students and people are starting off their, being sexual, usually involves some kind of intoxication. So probably not the best way. And then also through lust, Jing is lost through lust, an obsession with sex, excessive desire in general. So we're going back to Jingshen, this idea that our, this kind of looking around and wanting things is going to deplete our sexual energy. Overexertion during sex. There's actually some really humorous passages when you look at some of the classics about men are supposed to lie still and be very passive during sex. But I don't think you have to go that far. But I think depending on your Jing level and your age, having the appropriate level of exertion during sex. We all, have heard about men having a heart attack with a much younger woman, all those types of things. So having the appropriate level of exertion with sex. And then excessive sex is a greater issue with men because we see that direct correlation between Jing and the sperm. So obviously all of these things are going to affect men more than it affects women. And then obviously when having sex when your health is already compromised, you're exhausted, not a good time when we're already kind of fighting off an exterior invasion, not a good time to engage in sex. Excuse me. Now, for women, what does that mean? It's not as direct a link between Jing and the egg. In the Huangdi Jing, it's explicitly said in Huangdi Jing and in several classical works, Jing and sperm, direct. Sometimes translated, one is translated as the other. Now, what about with women? Well, they do say that the Jing of the mother and the father come together to form the child. That obviously is the egg from the woman. And so that's when we have this association between menstrual blood and Jing loss, and also Jing being lost during childbearing. So not only do women give their Jing for the conception of the child, but by carrying the baby, we are also taxing our kidney energy, our Jing energy, during the entire gestation to help to feed the child. Like you hear the old wives' tale that for every child, a woman loses a tooth. That's something that it's a very wise saying, wise observation, is that women will take from their own Jing when they're not adequately nourished in order to provide for that child, and certainly through breastfeeding, there's continued blood loss to the baby, to nurse the baby. So I'm just going to have another cough drop here. It's the cold season in Florida. It's dipped down to 60 degrees, and we're feeling it. So then we come to this idea of tiangui and the kidneys. Tiangui is a very complex subject, but it is basically, it's deeply connected with Jing, because it starts to activate when the kidney energy has become matured in both boys and girls, and it has a lot to do with the access of the endocrine organs, that whole hormonal cascade that happens during puberty and that happens during menopause and then andropause in men later on in life. Lost sound. Okay, can you guys hear me? Can I get a feedback that you guys are hearing me? Yes. Okay. So Wang Bing says that Gui is to say Tian Gui. That is the water of the north, the name of the heavenly stems. The controlling vessel Renmai and the thoroughfare vessel Changmai are both extraordinary conduit vessels. When the qi of the kidneys is complete and abundant, the thoroughfare and the controlling vessel are passed by the flow. The menstrual blood gradually accumulates and moves down when its time comes. The Changmai is the sea of blood. The Renmai governs uterus and fetus. When both supply each other, one may have children. So the Chang and Ren, the Tiangui, when we hear these kinds of terms in the medical literature, it has a lot to do with the kidney energy and the Jing energy in women. So I think it's important to keep that in mind when we're reading these kinds of texts and how they relate to modern women, how they relate to Jing. When we're hearing these other terms, we're really talking also about Jing functioning in women. As Sun Simiao Miao said, women are more complicated. With men, you can say Jing is sperm and call it a day. With women, you have a lot more processes happening, a lot more things that can go wrong, and a lot more things that we have to focus on. So with women, we have a lot of times because menstruation is thought of as blood, we have to really focus more on things like blood deficiency, blood circulation issues. We have to focus a lot on spleen qi as a way, especially the Yangming channels, the Chongmai and the Renmai. Those types of things are more of an issue dealing with women's health. So I think that's also why it was more important for me to write about women's healthcare practices, because we have a lot more going on. We have a lot more cycles to talk about than men do. So it does get more complicated, but it is important to still see that connection with the Jing. So, and more on this subject, Fu Qingju, who is, if you're going to read classics for gynecology, Fu Qingju's Gynecology it's been translated by, I think, the Blue Poppy Press, is amazing. I think it's a necessary read to understand a little bit of how to deal with women's issues conceptually. He was really an amazing scholar, physician, and so he talks about this idea of Jing Shui, um, where he's saying, he makes a real point that um, menstruation is not just blood, and that in the fact that it's called Jing Shui, it's called this. It has this, the water shui, calling it water, relates it to the kidneys, relates it to Jing. We don't just call it blood. So that means that menstruation is not just blood. There's this other essence component to it. That means that it's not just women are losing blood every month. They're losing a little bit of their Jing, not as much, as they do when they're pregnant, but they are losing a little bit of their Jing. And so that means that we need to treat it as more important than we currently do. That means that we need to rest and nurture ourselves a little bit more than we may have thought we did during our menstruation. And then Pu Qingju, he was a practicing Taoist, and he did have this other book where he talks about the more alchemical ideas of slaying the red dragon, or actually transforming the menstruation in women so that they ideally would menstruate only 4 times a year or once a season. He actually wrote about that in a separate text. And so as a means for vitality, the same way that men were taught to limit ejaculation, he's advocating limiting menstruation. And we're going to talk about that as well during the Taoist sexuality course. But it just is super interesting to see how, all these different terms of, when you see the term water, a lot of times it has this correlation with kidney functioning and Jing functioning. So the correlation between Jing and blood, if qi is not exhausted, it returns essences to the kidneys to be transformed into Jing. If Jing is not depleted, it returns to the liver to be transformed into blood. This is another quote kind of talking about how the correlation between Jing and blood, and how they kind of, one feeds into the other. Especially if you think about Jing as being the in aspect of the kidneys, we see a real easy correlation, real easy connection with blood, with liver blood, and how one would affect the other. I think this is a good time for our second video that we have on it. It's a little kidney tonifying qigong exercise, which I think it's a very easy. I love easy exercises because they allow us to first of all teach people and have more compliance with our patients. Rob, can you set up the next video, please? Perfect. Okay, here we go.
This is warming the kidneys. The kidneys tend to get depleted as we age. This exercise will tonify the kidneys, tonify the adrenals, and help with anti-aging. First, you want to warm the hands by rubbing them together. And then I'm going to rub the kidney area, which is located at the bottom of the back ribs, 36 times. This is a great exercise to do before you go to bed at night. And then I'm just going to hold and allow the heat of my hands to penetrate into my kidneys.
So you see that was a very simple, can you see me? That was a very simple kidney exercise, very quick. I like to give that as homework before you go to bed at night when I have anybody who is having any kind of kidney or Jing deficiency. So, for example, someone who's, especially someone who's going through menopausal issues, someone who's overworked. Those are nice exercises. Someone who's gone through a lot of stress and a lot of fear. That's a nice little exercise, very quick, start bringing energy into the kidneys. And also, you can feel when you do an exercise like that, and you bring your focus down into your kidneys, down into your lower body, it takes you out of that overstimulation, stressed out kind of mindset that it's so easy for us to get into. Any questions on anything that I've said? Oh, someone's having issues with, are we still having issues with sound? Someone had made a comment. Are there any questions or comments on anything that I've said? Why rub the kidney area 36 times? They like the number 36 in a lot of these exercises. Usually 36 is related to men's exercises, I found, in a lot of different Qigong traditions. I don't remember why. There has something to do with the numerology, the men being associated with something that adds up to 36, and I don't remember what that is, but there's a reason given. Usually women do things 24 times and men do it 36 times. It's typically how it works. There's also a correlation between blood and breast milk, going back to women's issues. The blood constitutes the essential qi of grain and water. In women, it becomes breast milk above and becomes sea of blood below. Thus, while the heart governs blood and the liver stores blood, it is also controlled by the spleen. So we see, first of all, the menstrual blood is connected with the Jing, and then we have the blood is connected with the breast milk. It comes from the same resources in a woman's body. And this is going to be much more important later on when we discuss postpartum care. Why is it so important for women to take care of themselves, not just during the postpartum month, but during the entire time in which they're breastfeeding, and why that is such a depletion on their bodies? So to kind of sum up nurturing life, we have, oh no, breast milk is not Jing itself, and I'm sorry to create confusion on that one. Breast milk is not Jing itself. It correlates to blood, liver blood, in women. So, but because there's that easy kind of connection between blood and kidney yin, kidney Jing, a depletion in blood can over time lead to a depletion in the kidney yin. And when we have women who are really depleted, and I've seen this a lot in my practice when we have women who are a little bit older, not just that, but I think a lot of us are kind of blood and yin deficient just by our lifestyle. Our lifestyle tends to foster that, I should say. That after women have a baby, it very quickly jumps from a blood deficiency to a yin deficiency, I've seen, especially when you're talking about women in their later 30s, early 40s having children, which is a lot of the population that I see. Educated women who've waited longer to have children and have kind of pushed themselves hard their whole lives. One translates into the other very, very quickly. But Jing and breast milk are not directly related. They're related through this connection with the blood, is what I was trying to say. Okay. So nurturing life, this thing of Yangsheng, it's central to our medicine. It is actually what started our medicine on the course that it took, away from the more magical ideas of Taoist ideas, and set it on more of what we would now call a more scientific, systematic course. And it laid out very specific ways in which we can start to live a healthier life, and how we can start conserving our Jing. One of these is through Qigong and meditation practice. This is something that all of us should be doing. It's something that we tend to learn in school, And as we go off into our practices and things like that, we start to lose track of it. And I remember one of my Qigong teachers saying that, you have to make sure that you cultivate your qi so that when you're in the treatment room, it's your healthy qi that's, influencing the situation, not the patient's sick qi that's, influencing you. I think it's important to remember that when we're in the treatment room, we're really holding space and creating grounding a certain vitality or energy in the room to raise up the patient. That's what we're doing. And if we are not cultivating our own qi, it's only a matter of time before that starts to flip and we start to become affected by all of the illness that comes through our doors. And so that's one thing that I have found in my own life through living and having a busy practice for many years and seeing how easy it is to not take care of myself and what that does, to really emphasize how much the Qigong meditation practice is essential. You need to have that practice before things get really stressful, before the challenging things hit. When you have that Qigong practice, it'll help kind of insulate you a little bit from those ups and downs that life will inevitably throw at you. And if you have a clinic, those ups and downs usually happen every day. Especially if you're managing employees or whatever you're doing, that's going to happen. And having that Qigong practice, that meditation practice, is going to be essential to ground you through that process. And it's going to make you infinitely more effective as a physician, because at that point we are influencing, we're keeping our qi healthy, and we're influencing the qi of our patients and modeling that healthy living for the patient. And then also, I try to, depending on the openness of my patients, I try to influence them to have some kind of meditation Qigong practice. Many times it's easier for me to recommend a yoga practice because I can send them to a class down the street. Much harder to find easy to access Qigong classes and things like that. You can get them, online, DVDs, things like that. But in terms of finding a teacher, where I am right now, there's not a large, Chinese community or alternative medicine community, so it's easier for me to recommend a yoga class, for example. But I also will, with patients that are more open, I actually will teach some Qigong exercises, especially like those little mini, like medical Qigong type exercises, which are very short and specific for certain health issues. Things like healing sounds, really, really helpful. People usually enjoy doing them. They're fast. They can feel a difference in their body right away. Really important to start having people do those types of things. And then also adapting diet and lifestyle to the seasons and to daily living. This is very an interesting challenge, I think, with a lot of my patients. I have had patients who are very adamant on very kind of what I would consider extreme diets. So my first thing would be to try to moderate the extremity of some of these diets. I think that's the first step in a lot of these cases. People have suffered health issues, and they sometimes will kind of hold on to these kind of very extreme diets as a means to get themselves healthy, and they don't want to go back to where they were, and so they'll kind of connect with that, which is not always healthy long term for them. Maybe sometimes people have to remove certain things for a certain period of time, but long term it will deplete them and cause more issues. So educating people on that, I think, is the first step in a lot of cases. And then you have the other extreme where people don't want to have any kind of self-control at all, and you have to kind of bring them into the middle as well. And then also learning how to people need to learn, your patients need to learn how to develop a little bit of a sense of, okay, if it's cold and rainy, I need to have something warm and nourishing. If it's really hot and steamy out there, I need to have like something very light and cooling, and kind of getting that sense of what those things are. In the beginning, we can do that by saying, okay, you have a damp constitution. dampness is going to get worse with things like sugar and dairy foods and certain things like that are cold and have sugar and dairy, like ice cream, for example, would be the epitome of a damp promoting food. And start educating them on those things so they start realizing, oh, it's damp outside, it's cold and wet. That means I need to eat these kinds of foods, and start teaching them those kinds of concepts. I think is really important because it gives them empowerment over their own lives. And all of a sudden health becomes something that they are actively engaged in. The other thing too is to start becoming in tune with natural rhythms. I think this is the hardest thing for all of us to do because our society is kind of based for us to not have to worry about natural rhythms. But that's going to be the key to our health, because whether or not we're aware of them, the natural rhythms are happening. So whether or not we're aware of our period, our body is going through this monthly cycle. Whether or not we are aware of our Jing cycles, our body over the course of our lifetimes is going through this natural cycle. The seasons are still happening whether or not you have air conditioning or not. So it is still necessary for us to keep that connection and that awareness, both in our own lives and the lives of our patients. So these are kind of the foundation of nurturing life in our medicine. Much harder to do now than it was 2,000 years ago. The men's practices specifically are going to be those kind of general Yangshen practices plus these. They're going to need to be more focused on moderating sexual activity. Not so much of an issue for women, but because the sperm is directly tied to Jing, it becomes much more important for men's vitality to keep that moderated. Not as important when men are very young, teenage boys, not that much of an issue. But as Sun Sun Miao said, once you start getting to be late 30s, early 40s, that's the time when you have to start really moderating that. And checking in with how you feel and making sure that you're not overexerting yourself. In terms of restraining excess desires, Jingshen, that's something that our culture really pushes, is that with men, it's like pornography is very, it's everywhere, and it's kind of this constant sexual stimulation to sell everything. And I think men have to really guard against that, not from a moral standpoint, but from a standpoint of their vitality and keeping those desires kind of reined in and focused on when they want to express them, not constantly being taxed when it doesn't serve them at all. I think that's a really important practice. And then at age 40 also, it's a good time for men to start taking some Jing tonics. Jing tonics, according to Sun Sun Miao, not such a good idea for younger men. And the reason for that is he says that by taking Jing tonics too early, it's going to be a complete waste. It's actually going to make men tax themselves further and squander their Jing early on. So because they already have enough Jing, giving them extra just means they're going to misbehave more. And so he says that around age 40, when the Jing naturally would start to decline, tonifying that Jing is the right time to do that. So that's important for us as practitioners. When you have men approaching that age or older, it's really important to always make sure that we're strengthening or supporting their Jing in their body. For women's practices, again, the same Yangshen practices as for everybody. But with women, we're more complicated. We really have to focus on those cycles. So starting with the menstrual cycle, first of all, when does the menstrual cycle start? If girls are, I think 14 is a little bit on, the late side for a lot of girls. Probably 11, 12 is becoming the more normal nowadays, but certainly not 7 or 9 years old. It's a little too early to start the period at those ages. So looking at some hormonal disruptions when things happen too early. So when menarche occurs, that's important in terms of menstrual renewal. And then from that time forward, making sure that the menstruation has a regular flow to it, that it's not, there's not a lot of PMS symptoms, there's an easy flow to the menstrual blood, that there's, that it happens at a regular time every month. All those things way before a woman even thinks about wanting to get pregnant, when she's in her teens, really important to start also building good habits about proper care during menstruation. Not a good time to run a marathon when you're bleeding. Not a good time to push yourself extra during that time. You should be having some nourishing foods, rebuilding your blood, rebuilding kidney energy during your menstruation every month. You should be resting more, all those types of things. Starting those practices early on makes for conserving your Jing in smaller increments throughout your life. It's much more important during postpartum, during pregnancy and postpartum, to conserve Jing, because that constitutes a much bigger depletion or bigger draw on women's Jing than menstruation does. So that means that the postpartum month, women are resting during that month. They have all these different practices. They're eating nourishing foods. If they won't take herbs, you sneak it in as food herbs in their diet. If they take herbs, even better. It's going to be really, really helpful during that time. It's probably the most critical time in a woman's life is that postpartum month in terms of getting them back to, conserving their Jing as much as possible and getting them back to a balanced body as soon as possible. Very, very important for their lives, and also especially if they want to have more children, really critical. And then at age 35, that's when we want to prepare for menopause. I know the dreaded M word, but it's actually a beautiful natural process if we make it that way. And there's a lot of ways to do that, and I'm going to be discussing that later on. But at age 35, that's when we want to start taking Jing tonics and really making sure we're living a healthy, nurturing life. And that's important with our patients. At that age, we start to really make sure that we're promoting Jing conservation with our patients and giving them lifestyle advice. And then we have to, as women, more important than moderating sexual activities, we have to heal and learn how to circulate our sexual energy. And we'll be talking about that as well later on in the future class. Really important for women to heal the sexual energy, because we already have an abundance of it. We just have not always been taught how to nurture it or support it in a healthy way. So we're going over that as well. So I had a question, what about young women who take meds to have periods less often? How does that affect Jing? Well, it does not. Women who stop their periods or minimize their periods with birth control pills, that's not the same thing as what Fu Qingju was saying by advocating limiting periods through meditation. Doing it chemically like that, what you're actually doing is stagnating. Usually you're stagnating liver blood. You can also cause some deficiencies over time. But stagnation is the first issue, because if you think about it, you're stopping that natural release and movement of fluids. So that's the main issue that I see is a blood stagnation, liver qi stagnation issue happening with that. So we're getting up on time here. The Flourishing Yin series, we have menstrual renewal coming up in 2 weeks. I hope you join me for that. We will go through the rest of the series, postpartum recovery in February, second spring, which is menopausal care in March, Chinese cosmetology, where we do facial rejuvenation, those types of things in April, and then Taoist sexuality in May. So I hope that you guys will join me for all the classes, or you can pick and choose whichever ones you would like to go to. And it's been a pleasure to speak with you guys today. I just wish it was a little bit more interactive and I could actually hear your comments. Are there any other questions or comments? We have 3 minutes. Someone said she needs to start preparing now. We all do. That's true. Any other questions, comments? Oh, good. I'm glad people liked it. I haven't heard anybody say anything bad. That's great. You're very polite. Okay. Maybe I went through that a little bit too fast. No other questions? Okay. Oh, and considering certification, will taking exams be available immediately after each class or at the end of class? That is a question for Rob. So Samantha asked if with the certification, the test is at the end or after each class. I believe there
I just wanted
are questions.
to let you guys know that there's no test associated with your certification. The certificates are available at the end of each class, and you can print them out. They'll be available Monday afternoon.
Poor Rob, he's babysitting right now. That's why it was harder for him to kind of jump in. Poor guy. He's the guy behind the scenes who makes sure that all of these classes happen as beautifully as they do. And then he has a toddler and a baby on top of it. So big applause for Rob for what he does. So I guess there is not a test after each class, but there are questions associated with each section that probably will be at the end of this certification series, I'm guessing. But Rob would have to be the one weighing in on that. I think that we are done then. Oh, where can we get my books? Oh, yes, I have to promote myself. If you go to liaandrews.com, it's LIAANDREWS. Actually, I can just type it in right here, I guess. It's just liaandrews.com, probably the easiest way. All my books are available on Amazon. So if you just search my name on Amazon, they'll come up. I have a book on 7 Times a Woman, which is the 7-year Jing cycles for women. I talk a little bit about each phase. And then I have a separate book on postpartum recovery. I'm currently working on a book on Taoist sexuality because I feel like that is an area where I was very, I guess, repulsed is the right word, about the Taoist sexual practices that I saw being promoted when I was at school amongst the students and everything. And I knew there had to be something more to it. So I kind of, as I'm researching the book and also through the class I'm going to be teaching on Taoist sexuality, is kind of stripping some of that kind of what I would consider unethical teachings and really going back to the part that's, life affirming and supportive of equality and respect between the sexes and that kind of stuff. So that's coming up. So Rob is saying that we will return to the class after each live webinar to access your CEU certificate. Oh, thank you, Elizabeth, for the compliment on my book. I appreciate that. Okay, so there were some technical issues. There, you can contact Rob directly if you look at the question and comment section. Go ahead and email Rob directly for questions about the certification class in terms of taking. You can sign up for that online, so we signed up for this, but for in terms of taking the quiz and everything, when you do that, I'm not aware of that. I will be during the next class, but you can ask Rob directly right now. Oh, good. So support for women's version of the bedroom arts. Yes, yes. We have a very women-focused profession, a really empowering profession for women. So that part needs to be brought up to speed for sure. So I'm glad that's going to be happening. And then there's also a sample of my book at the PCOM library. Elizabeth said. Thank you very much. Okay, guys, I've kept you long enough on a beautiful Saturday. Go enjoy yourselves. Have some water time today. And thank you so much. Please join me in 2 weeks for part 2 on menstrual renewal, where I teach you how to love your period. Thank you.